Can you feel the excitement in the air? I'm Niall Paterson and we're recording this edition of the Sky News Daily ahead of the opening match in the Euros between hosts Germany and, you guessed it, the mighty Scotland. 200,000 members of the Tartan Army have already descended on Munich. Good luck, Munich. So we will be reflecting on the inevitable Scottish victory a little later with our sports correspondent Rob Harris. He might also provide a little update as to England's chances. But we begin in Italy. The leaders of the G7 nations have been meeting, Ukraine at the top of their agenda. And while some significant progress has been made, a huge aid package funded from frozen Russian assets, plus a 10-year US-Ukraine security agreement. Our international affairs editor is, of course, Dominic Waghorn, and he joins us from the G7, where the weather is rather better than it is here back in Blighty, Dom. Look, the US President Joe Biden has said this demonstrates that democracies can deliver. So let's start there. What have these Western democracies delivered to Ukraine?
The weather is amazing, and this is kind of a contrast between the absolutely stunning setting of this sort of wellness spa resort where these leaders have been meeting on the edge of the Adriatic, and the geopolitical outlook that they're grappling with, which is anything but beautiful, really quite ugly. And what they're trying to do is to continue to project unity and strength and resolve and dealing with one threat, which is Russia, and also the alliance of autocracies are kind of teaming up behind Russia. But the other big threat is the threat to most of them back home, which is the threat from populist parties, the far right or just right-wing parties, which are threatening to topple nearly all of them. And their kind of problems dealing with that is possibly undermining their success in dealing with the threat of Russia. So what they've tried to do is to put together a couple of packages that they hope will project unity and resolve and strength, and really to say to the Russians that they're in it for keeps, as they've been saying for 2.5 years. If you hope we're going to go away, they're saying to Vladimir Putin, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So one of these deals was taking the Russian assets, $300 billion worth of them that Europeans and the Americans have frozen since the beginning of the war, not to liquidate those assets, so not selling them, but taking that as collateral and using the interest from that to raise $50 billion for the Ukrainians. That's a significant diplomatic achievement because there were disagreements about how to do that right up to the eve of this summit. But the bigger deal was actually on the sidelines of this summit, a bilateral deal between the Americans and the Ukrainians, which is a 10-year security pact, which is guaranteeing a whole lot of commitment, military and diplomatic, to the Ukrainians. And that's also sending a clear message to Vladimir Putin that the alliance is in it for keeps. But hanging over all of that are doubts about the individual members of this alliance and the alliance itself, which kind of undermines the promises they make, because I think, in the minds of many people, including Vladimir Putin, will be, what kind of commitment can they make if most of them won't be in their jobs for an awful lot longer.
So clearly some significant progress has been made, but as you say, the concern will be if there is a new US president, for example, come the end of this year, then this might all collapse. But even getting to this point, as you've already said, was incredibly difficult. Why? Why was it so difficult to allocate these frozen Russian assets and deliver them to Ukraine?
It's to do with the fact that this is an alliance of democracies, and it's not in a totalitarian state. So while Vladimir Putin could have just taken the assets of Ukraine, as he is doing, and seizing lands that he's taken in Ukraine and done what he wants with, the Western democracies can't do that. They have to follow international law. And there were differences between various European countries' interpretation of that law. If to anybody listening, surely you've got $300 billion worth of assets, probably ill-gotten assets. That's money in banks. It's the assets of oligarchs. So why can't you just sell them and give that money to the Ukrainians? It is more complicated than that. There was a whole world of diplomatic difficulty. So on the eve of this summit, as I say, there were reports that the Europeans just weren't having it. They're actually accusing the Americans of almost pulling a fast one, because the Europeans were going to be having to act as a kind of guarantors for this debt, which they didn't feel they were happy with. But they've got it over the line, and therefore it is being hailed as a big breakthrough. It has to be said, though, that $50 billion is a lot of money, but Ukraine's going to need a huge amount more than that to win this war and also to rebuild itself afterwards.
I just wonder, that lump of money, plus this decade-long bilateral, the US-Ukraine security agreement, taking in intelligence cooperation, strengthening of Ukrainian defence industries, 5 Patriot missile defence systems being thrown into the mix as well. What cumulatively, what effect do we think that will have on the war?
It's not enough. And I think what is most important is what the Americans have done bilaterally and directly with the Ukrainians. It's not a defense treaty, but it's similar to the kind of agreements that the Americans have with the Israelis. So if the Ukrainians are attacked again in the future, should this war ever end, then they will immediately be able to consult their American partners in this pact. And it's really important, this. I think it sends a very clear message to the Russians that this is a long-term commitment. And, we can speculate a lot about what Donald Trump, if he is elected, which at the moment is looking increasingly likely, what he will do to both NATO and to the G7 and to the American alliance with Ukraine. But generally, these kind of pacts do survive changes of president and administration in America because they run so deep in the kind of military infrastructure and security echelons of the two countries.
So we await the final communique to emerge from behind that ring of steel 50 miles away from you, and we will go through it with a fine-tooth comb when it does. But the rhetoric that has already been deployed by various leaders, most notably Joe Biden, I have to say, has really grabbed my attention. He talked about this being an inflection point, a moment that we only encounter once every 6 or 7 generations. We really need to reflect the fact, don't we, Dominic, that the world is at a crossroads right now.
Yeah, very much so. That rules-based world order that's based on multilateral cooperation that's kept us stable and relatively secure and relatively prosperous for 8 decades, that is under threat, very directly and in a military sense by Russia, but also by the kind of alliance of authoritarian autocracies from Tehran to Beijing that's kind of galvanized into unity. But also this populist threat at a more domestic, local level is equally a threat to these leaders. So parties that threaten them back home, particularly Donald Trump, do not believe in multilateral organization. Trump, as we saw in his first term, he believes in a transactional view of the world, that if you're playing a game with another partner, someone has to win, someone has to lose. You can't all win together. He doesn't believe in force multipliers. He doesn't believe in these organizations being good for America. He doesn't seem to believe in NATO. So in a year's time, if he does win, and that is looking increasingly likely, I have to say, again, Joe Biden has looked shaky and old in this summit. And all of that, I think, leads many people to believe that Donald Trump is the most likely successor to him, someone who doesn't believe in the G7. Could be 6 months into dismantling NATO if he does win by the time the next G7 meets. He may not even join the meeting next time round, and you could see a lame duck president in France, and who knows what's going to happen in Germany. So there is a huge amount at stake here. And I think Joe Biden is right to point that out, to point out that the liberal democratic world order is, a graver threat than it has been since the Second World War. The problem is he and the other allies meeting here, their personal futures are also compromising and jeopardising the future of that alliance because they are on such shaky ground politically back home.
Thanks, Dom. We're back in a moment when we are off to Munich, Scotland kicking off the tournament in an all-important clash with hosts Germany. Stay where you are. Welcome back. Time for the most important story of the day, of course, the Euros. Now, we are recording this Friday afternoon, and in just a few hours, Scotland kicks off the competition, taking on hosts Germany. England, they are the other of the home nations to have qualified. Hundreds of thousands of fans have already arrived. The bagpipes are playing, the sun is shining, the beer is not so much flowing as gushing, and it looks set to be a fantastic tournament, providing some much needed relief from the general election. Our sports correspondent, Rob Harris, is in Germany for the duration. Rob, just give us a feeling of the mood in Munich right now. I'll bet there's an awful lot of happy faces.
You would think there's actually only one country playing this opening match, I reckon. Scotland against no one, because there's only one colour shirt you see anywhere across Munich, and it is the Scotland shirt and the Tartan Army. But of course, the reason why they're opening is they're playing the host Germany.
And much, much more about Scotland and their chances later on in the podcast. But any competition where millions of people are arriving from around the world to watch football, there are inevitably security concerns there, Rob. And how have the Germans responded?
Well, they've got their biggest ever federal policing operation in place for a major event. They have so many police deployed at this. Interestingly, though, watching how they are adopting their approach to policing, it is low-key to a degree, having observed particularly thousands of Scotland fans gathered around Munich's main square in the days before their opening match. So much drinking going on, crates of beer, singing late into the night. But you don't really spot the police. Now, in other countries, particularly France, you'll often see a really visible police presence. And to some degree, that can be provocative to some people. So it's a notably different approach how they are looking at it in terms of this tournament. Obviously, the terror threat is always there for these major events, particularly in Europe. And of course, the fear of hooliganism that can pervade the Euros. This is a notable event because it's the first major tournament with a load of fans moving around really since Euro 2016. If we think about what has gone on between then, the 2018 World Cup in Russia and Qatar 2022, those World Cups were more problematic for fans, or they wanted to stay away for rights reasons. And then the Euros in between that was the pandemic Euros. So travel was restricted for many fans. So the last time we got something like this was in 2016. And there was hooliganism there. It involved England fans, it involved Russia fans in particular right at the start. So that's why there is the trepidation, while everyone hopes it is a tournament that brings everyone together.
And we sincerely hope that we do not see a repeat of those violent scenes. But I have to say, just anecdotally, and I wonder if your kind of experience backs this up, I have so many friends who are either in Germany right now or on their way. Muzz, Steph, Rob, DC10, Ianson, all members of the Tartan Army, I hasten to add. I suspect this might be one of the better attended football competitions that there's ever been.
We're going to see so many fans here. They're predicting hundreds of thousands just from the UK alone supporting England and Scotland, because just walking around the square, even here in Munich, families who have come just without tickets because, it's quite an accessible place to come to. It's an experience they all want to be part of. Obviously, particularly if you are Scotland, you've not had an overseas tournament since 1998 in terms of the men's game.
Well, let's start with the home nations who will be attending the Euros. And I'll give the honours to you, Rob, here. England, at fourth in the world at the moment, but it doesn't necessarily look like this is a group that will cause them a huge amount of bother, although I may just have jinxed it in saying that.
Just by saying that, facing Serbia, potentially is a tricky start. We saw their last warm-up game was a defeat to Iceland, which brings back memories of one of those great humiliations I was at in Euro 2016 when they were knocked out by the newcomers in the round of 16. So that's why, there will be that sense of wariness. Denmark and Slovenia, should be okay for them, you would expect, because this format is quite favourable in terms of the group stage. It'd be very difficult not to get out of it because you get 24 teams going down to just 16 in the last 16. So you're just losing 8 teams from the group stage. So all the top 2 teams go through in the groups and many of the best third place teams as well. So often, even if you've got 3 points potentially could be enough, but 4 points means you're getting through. So a win and a draw from 3 matches.
Key players for England this tournament. I suppose the list has to begin and end with Jude Bellingham.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he is an incredible talent, so much so you can forget at times that he is only 20 years old. I spent time interviewing him in March, and he's got such a wise head for someone just so young. And if you think about the career he's had, he, moved from England to Borussia Dortmund here in Germany during the pandemic, and then has made the step up to Real Madrid. And that is amongst the hardest clubs in the world to adapt to and to be taken on board by the fans. Again, another player I interviewed recently, not to drop too many names, was Gareth Bale, who always had a difficult relationship with the fans at Real Madrid, despite scoring incredible goals in key games like Champions League finals. But Bellingham has already shown he's making such a huge impact, the number of goals he scored even without being an outright striker. And, we saw his impact even at Qatar in 2022 for England. So he certainly can stamp his impression on this tournament.
But let's move on to the main event, of course, at Scotland. Very, very difficult group. Germany, Hungary, Switzerland, and to take on the hosts in the opening match. Like, we've been here before and it's never gone well for us.
Well, the fact Scotland have never made it out of the group stage once at a major tournament.
Stop reminding me.
But in terms of Germany, it can be daunting. Let's face it, they're a team still with World Cup winners from 2014 in the side, like Müller and Kroos. So they've got that experience. But here is that glimmer of hope. Look at the last 3 tournaments.
Yeah.
They've gone out in the group stage in 2 of them, in both the recent World Cups and in the last Euros. They went out in the last 16. So they're not perhaps that formidable force that everyone associates Germany with, this all conquering footballing side that sweeps up trophies. So, that perhaps offers some hope, even though, of course, they've got home soil advantage and they'll be hoping for that patriotic fervour to help them.
But let's not forget, who was it that beat Spain in the qualifiers? Oh, yeah, that's right. It was Scotland. And to be fair, whilst we have had some injury concerns that I understand will be giving Steve Clarke a bit of a headache, Scott McTominay, 7 goals in qualifying. I mean, we talk about potential heroes of this tournament. If something brilliant happens this evening, I suspect he'll be a part of it.
And he scored more goals in qualifying than Norway's Erling Haaland, the Manchester City player who is one of the best strikers in the world. And of course, Norway didn't qualify. So despite having such a huge talent like Haaland, ultimately the collection of Scotland players, along with John McGinn, that's who everyone seems to be singing about in Munich at the moment, Super John McGinn. Well, Scott McTominay as well has been one of those mainstays for Manchester United in recent years. Perhaps, obviously not the biggest superstar, unheralded to many, but he's certainly managed to make an impact to sort of guide them through. And, you get a sense, particularly also hearing from Andy Robertson, who has experienced winning the Premier League with Liverpool in 2020, about how the Scotland team has come together in recent years after perhaps being a bit more divided and, not necessarily having the fans on board with, those optimistic results. Particularly, I think, beating Spain was something that really helped to sort of captivate fans even beyond Scotland, even as an Englishman.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. But to be fair, because as you so graciously reminded everyone, Scotland have not gotten out of the group stages in any major tournament. What we often find at competitions like this is that the stars of Scotland are perhaps not necessarily found on the pitch. The Tartan Army, that name that's given to the travelling support, that really do go out and enjoy themselves. And I have to say, largely without much bother. You've been out in the heart of them so far this tournament. How are they sounding?
Oh, they're sounding absolutely in full voice. And, first of all, mass group of football fans with a lot of drink, but absolutely no issues at all. The bagpipes are just, they help to sort of provide this signalling call for the return of Scotland. You can hear them through the streets, and the locals absolutely quite enchanted by so many kilts being worn.
Enchanted or in terror, Rob? One of the two. One of the two.
Well, I've had a bottle of butt past even already smashed on me accidentally by one incredible guy, Craig Ferguson, a 20-year-old who walked all the way from Hampden to here, 1,000 miles, raising over £50,000 for mental health charities, and that helped to bring so many people into the square. They really have brought a lot to the party, travelling in big numbers. Wait for someone to, in a few months' time, probably provide that Bavarian economy boost. How much do Scotland fans boost the economy by here?
I mean, do the Tartan Army on this occasion, given what we have seen previous weeks and indeed previous competitions, do they actually have any confidence we might get through this time?
Some have said to me, we have won already, the party. Others actually genuinely are confident. The fact the format does allow them to try to find a way of getting through. And, there will be the disappointments, big name players, perhaps like Lewis Ferguson, who are sort of out injured as well, who'd be relied on. But I think this qualifying campaign has given them a confidence. Steve Clarke has also helped to sort of bring the team and the fans together. We know it will be a formidable task. Big boy trousers time then, Rob. Who's going to win the Euros? And you're not allowed to say Scotland or England. France certainly had that momentum behind them, I would say. You can't discount Germany given the fact they are the hosts, and that can, carry them to a certain degree. We saw even against England when I was there in Qatar in the quarter-final, and, it was pretty close between them. Ultimately, France had that sort of edge, and they've got Mbappe, who's just left Paris Saint-Germain, ready for a looming big money move to Real Madrid, and they will be a force to contend with. Rob, thank you. So, very best of luck to Scotland and to those members of the Tartan Army that started in the Beerhalle before the sun hit the yardarm. And in the spirit of conciliation, good luck, England. I'm Niall Paterson, and that is definitely your lot for this edition of The Daily. I'll see you next week. Unless, of course, Scotland win, that is.
No!